A police officer threatens a black man in a coffee shop, then freezes when he realizes it's a retired federal judge. The officer's hand hovered near his holster like it was second nature. Because for him, maybe it was. The buzz of the cafe faded into a thick, uneasy silence as the young officer stepped forward, boots scraping lightly against polished concrete. It was a place for lattes, MacBooks, and soft indie music, not conflict. But suddenly, all that warmth drained from the room. Everyone watched. No one moved. The man at the center of the storm didn't flinch. He stirred his coffee. "Sir," the officer barked, sharp as gravel. "I asked you a question." He was tall, too tall for the room, all angular intimidation in navy blues. His jaw flexed beneath a clean shave, and his eyes scanned the older man like he was a suspect, not a customer. But the man sitting by the window looked like he belonged there more than anyone. His suit was tailored, the kind that spoke in soft, expensive tones. His silver beard was neatly trimmed, glasses perched perfectly. He exuded the kind of calm you didn't fake. He also happened to be the only black person in the cafe. The officer's voice rose. "What are you doing here?" That was it. Not a request for ID. Not an investigation. Just a question soaked in assumption. The man took a slow sip of his coffee, savoring it. "I'm having my usual Colombian dark roast. No cream, no sugar," he replied, voice velvet smooth. "Same as every Tuesday. Same seat. Same time." His voice didn't waver, but his eyes, sharp and ancient, held a different weight. Something deeper than defiance. Something earned. The barista behind the counter, a college student named Natalie, froze mid-foam. She knew the man. Everyone did. Mr. Ellison. Always polite, always punctual. Tipped in 20s. Smiled at kids. Never asked for anything except silence and a strong cup. And now, for some reason, he was being questioned. The officer shifted, uncomfortable now. Maybe it was the man's tone. Maybe it was the growing silence around him, a silence packed with stares and unasked questions. Maybe it was the way Ellison's gaze didn't flinch, like he'd already seen this play out too many times. "I got a call," the officer said, as if that justified the moment. "Suspicious individual. Loitering. Making people uncomfortable." Ellison raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Yes, sir." He chuckled, not kindly. "Tell me." "Officer, was the call about a man drinking coffee quietly at a table?" "I'm just doing my job." "No. You're doing what someone else told you to do. And you haven't stopped to ask why." That landed hard. The officer straightened up, defensive now, but unsure. "You got ID?" Ellison reached slowly into his coat pocket. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. But when he pulled out his wallet, it wasn't fear or urgency that guided his fingers, it was methodical. Like he'd done this before. Like he knew how officers reacted. Like he had to move slow to stay alive. He handed over the card. The officer took it, glanced down and froze. It was a federal ID. Retired Judge Franklin D. Ellison. U.S. District Court. His face turned pale. He looked up again and saw Ellison differently. Saw the posture. The eyes, the invisible robe, the lifetime behind that simple piece of laminated plastic. "Judge Ellison, You didn't ask for my name," Ellison said softly. "You made a judgment before you even spoke to me." Natalie stepped forward now, words spilling out. "Officer, I know him. He comes in every week. He just reads and drinks coffee. That's all he ever does." The officer's mouth opened and closed. He handed back the ID with both hands, like it might shatter. "I apologize, Your Honor." A few people let out audible breaths. Others shook their heads. One person quietly filmed the entire thing from the corner. Ellison didn't smile, didn't nod. He tucked the ID back into his wallet and looked out the window, like the scene bored him. Or maybe, more painfully, like it didn't surprise him. "You're not the first," he said. "And you won't be the last." The officer cleared his throat, mumbled something, and left fast. Ellison kept sipping his coffee. The moment passed, but the air didn't return to normal. Not really. People whispered. Some looked ashamed. others inspired. One older woman walked over and placed a hand gently on Ellison's shoulder. "Thank you," she said. He looked up at her. "For what?" "For staying calm. For showing him who you are." Ellison shook his head slowly. "That's the problem. I shouldn't have to." Later that evening, Ellison sat in his quiet apartment, surrounded by leather-bound books and silent photos. Black and white snapshots of courtrooms, of protests, of younger versions of himself in robes and glasses, always standing in front of something bigger than him. He stared at his reflection in the window, at the ghost of himself in the glass. He remembered another time, 1967, when he sat on a stool at a diner counter in Alabama and refused to leave. A police baton had greeted his ribs that day. No one had apologized. No one had backed down. And yet here he was, 5 decades later, still being questioned for daring to exist where someone didn't think he belonged. He laughed bitterly. Progress, they called it. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter. "Dad, you're trending." She sent a link. He clicked. A video. Of him. Of the officer. Of the moment. It had 3.2 million views. And climbing. The headline: "Retired black federal judge confronted by police while sipping coffee handles it with unshakable grace." He shook his head. Closed the phone. The fame didn't matter. The moment wasn't new. But perhaps, just perhaps, someone would watch that clip and understand something they didn't before. He poured another cup of coffee. Colombian dark roast. No cream. No sugar. Same as always. Ellison didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear. Fear had been burned out of him decades ago. But out of something heavier. A bone-deep exhaustion that came not from age, but from repetition. The cycle. The loop. Always explaining, defending, performing dignity just to exist. At 3:12 a.m., he stood barefoot in his kitchen, watching the city's lights flicker. He lived on the 12th floor, far above the horns and sirens, but not far enough to escape the noise inside his head. He replayed the moment in the cafe. The officer's hand near the holster. The silence of the other customers. Natalie's trembling voice. And then that look, the one of shame, recognition, too late. He thought of Emmett Till, of Rodney King, of Tamir Rice, of George Floyd, and too many more. They didn't have federal IDs to pull from their pockets. The doorbell rang. He flinched, not from surprise, but instinct. Who rings a doorbell at 3 a.m.? He walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and saw a familiar face. Natalie, the barista. He opened the door. "I'm sorry," she blurted. "I didn't know where else to go. I needed to talk." He studied her. Her eyes were red. Not from drugs. From tears. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. "Come in," he said. She stepped into the warm light of his apartment, wrapped in an oversized hoodie, arms crossed like armor. She sat at his kitchen table while he poured tea. "Everyone keeps reposting the video," she said. "It's all over TikTok, Instagram. My friends keep tagging me in it. They say you're a hero." Ellison stirred honey into her cup. "I didn't do anything heroic." "But you did," she said. "You stayed calm. You showed that cop who you were. I shouldn't have had to." "I know," she said quickly. "I know that. It's just..." She paused. "I've never seen it like that before." "Seen what?" "The look in his eyes. The power shift. When he realized who you were. It was like the badge didn't matter anymore. Like he shrank." Ellison sat across from her. "And what did that teach you?" She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, that if you hadn't had that ID, he might have dragged you out anyway. Or worse. He nodded once. "That's the lesson." She looked away. "My boyfriend's black," she said softly. "And I used to tell him he was overreacting when he got nervous around cops. I used to say, just cooperate. Just be respectful. And now I feel stupid," she whispered. "Blind." He didn't comfort her. He didn't forgive her. He let the silence speak. "I want to do something," she said. "To help. To fix this. You can't fix it tonight. But I can start," she said. She pulled something out of her backpack. a folded petition. I'm organizing a town hall, a community meeting about racial bias and police conduct. It's small, just local, but we're inviting speakers, leaders, and I want you to be there. He leaned back. I've done my speaking. I know, but we need you. I need you. He looked into her eyes and saw it, that fire, that raw, shaken urgency that young people carried when they finally saw the curtain pulled back. He exhaled. When? Saturday, 5 p.m. At the library. I'll think about it. She nodded. Thank you for the tea. And just like that, she left. The next morning, Ellison's inbox was full. Journalists, activists, law professors, former clerks, old friends from law school who hadn't spoken to him in years, but now suddenly wanted to check in. He deleted most of it. But one message stopped him. Request for formal apology from the police department. Would you be willing to meet the chief? He stared at it for a long time. That afternoon, he sat in the precinct's lobby, wearing the same suit he wore in court a decade earlier. The receptionist eyed him like she wasn't sure what to make of him. Eventually, a tall man with a silver badge and a PR smile appeared. Chief Dawson, the kind of man who learned to say the right things after saying the wrong ones for years. Judge Ellison, he said, extending a hand. Thank you for coming. Ellison shook it. Firm, controlled. They sat in a windowless office. Dawson started with coffee, small talk, compliments. Then the real subject. We take this incident very seriously. Ellison didn't blink. Do you? Yes. The officer in question, Officer Kinley, is young. Still learning. He had his hand on his gun. I understand. That's unacceptable. Is it? Or is it standard training? Dawson hesitated. We're reviewing protocols, he said. Bias training. De-escalation workshops. Ellison leaned forward. I sat on the bench for 35 years, he said. You know what I learned? Training doesn't work unless the culture changes. You can feed someone seminars until they're blue in the face. But if the people at the top don't act like bias is poison, it just keeps growing. Dawson looked uncomfortable. We're trying. Then try harder. A pause. We'd like to issue a public apology, in coordination with your office. I don't have an office anymore. Of course. I meant. Ellison stood. I'm not here for your PR. I'm here to tell you this. What happened to me was caught on camera. Most of the time, it's not. And those people don't get apologies. They get buried. Dawson said nothing. Ellison walked to the door, then stopped. If you want to prove something, send your officers to that town hall on Saturday. And don't let them speak. Let them listen. And he left. Saturday came. The town library overflowed. Folding chairs ran out. People stood in corners, on stairs, leaned against walls. Some came in solidarity. Some in curiosity. A few in quiet protest. Ellison stood behind the podium, adjusting the microphone. Natalie sat in the front row, wide-eyed. Her boyfriend held her hand. I'm not here to be your lesson, Ellison began. But I will tell you a story. And he did. Not just the cafe, but the diner in 1967. The courtroom bomb threat in 1974. The cross burned on his lawn in 1982. The white lawyer who once called him boy in chambers. The juror who asked to be excused because she didn't trust his kind. The years it took for his name to mean something more than his skin. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just told the truth. And when he finished, the room was silent. Then someone stood. A young black teen in a hoodie. I've never seen a judge who looks like me, he said. Thank you. Another voice. What should we do? What can we do? Ellison looked around. The air was electric now. You listen, he said. You speak when it matters. You vote. You challenge your family. You teach your children differently. You use your voice where mine can't reach. Someone clapped. Then another. Then the whole room. He stepped back from the mic. Outside, as the crowd spilled into the dusk, Natalie caught up to him. You changed lives tonight, she said. I opened eyes, he corrected. They have to change themselves. But isn't that enough? Ellison looked around. A little girl hugged her father's leg while looking up at him. A white officer stood at the edge of the crowd, eyes lowered, no badge on display. Natalie watched him watching. I think you're changing something bigger, she whispered. He didn't answer. But for the first time in years, maybe since retirement, Franklin Ellison smiled. The following week brought a storm not of weather, but of media, politics, and public opinion. Franklin Ellison's name was everywhere. He didn't ask for it. He didn't want it. But he wasn't naive enough to think he could avoid it. A clip of his town hall speech went viral. A soundbite, "I'm not here to be your lesson, but I will tell you a story," appeared on news channels, Twitter, and even late-night shows. Protesters used it on their placards. College students printed it on T-shirts. Some praised him as a symbol of quiet strength. Others accused him of grandstanding. And buried within the noise was a darker undercurrent: emails, voicemails, threats from people who didn't want the system to be challenged. He'd seen it before. He didn't flinch. One morning, as Ellison walked to his favorite corner cafe, a different one now, a young man stepped into his path. "You Franklin Ellison?" the man asked. He was in his mid-20s. Skin pale, cap low, shirt too big for his frame. His voice was flat, like he was daring Ellison to say yes. Ellison nodded once. "I am." The young man didn't smile. "My dad said you ruined everything." "Who's your father?" "Officer Kinley." That name landed hard. The officer from the cafe. The young man stepped closer. "They're investigating him now. Stripped him of his badge until further notice." "That's what accountability looks like," Ellison said calmly. "No," the kid snapped. "That's what public lynching looks like. You turned the whole world on him because he made a mistake." Ellison's eyes narrowed, slow and measured. "Mistake? He didn't hurt you. But he had the power to. And he chose intimidation instead of inquiry." The man's fists curled. "You could have just walked away." "I've been walking away all my life," Ellison said, voice low. "And where has that gotten us?" People were watching now. A woman across the street pulled out her phone. A barista peeked through a cafe window. The young man realized it and stepped back. "You're not a hero," he hissed. "I don't need to be. You just ruined a good man's life." "No," Ellison replied. "The system did that when it trained him to see color before character." The man stared at him for a beat too long, then turned and walked away, fast. Ellison exhaled. His hands didn't shake. That night, Natalie called again. "Judge, are you okay?" she asked. "I saw a video of some guy yelling at you outside Bean and Barley." "I'm fine. I can't believe how people are turning this around. Like you did something wrong." Ellison sat back in his armchair, tired. "That's what happens when you tell a system it's broken." "Still," she said, "they're calling you divisive." "That word," Ellison said, smiling bitterly. "It always shows up. Not truthful, not honest, but divisive. As if the division wasn't already there." Natalie was silent for a moment. "Do you regret speaking out?" He paused, then said, "No, but I regret that I had to." 2 days later, a letter arrived in Ellison's mailbox. Handwritten. No return address. No signature. It read, "You made your point. Now stop. You're not saving anyone. You're just making it worse for all of us. Keep quiet or we'll make sure you do." He didn't report it. Not out of fear, out of exhaustion. Threats were as common as bills and about as boring. He burned the letter in his sink, watched the ashes swirl down the drain. At the next town hall, Ellison wasn't the only speaker. The organizers had invited 3 others: a former public defender, a black high school student, and, surprisingly, Officer Kinley's former supervisor, Sergeant Paul Reyes. Reyes was Latino, late 40s, and wore plain clothes. He spoke with a slow, thoughtful cadence. "When I trained Officer Kinley," Reyes said, "I told him, never assume, ask first, act second." but training only works if it's reinforced. He came from a town where the only black men he saw were mugshots. The room was silent. That's not an excuse. It's a diagnosis. Reyes looked at Ellison directly. I failed him, and that failure nearly cost you your life. Ellison didn't speak, but he inclined his head. A quiet acknowledgement. After the town hall, they spoke briefly in the parking lot. I appreciate your honesty, Ellison said. Reyes sighed. I should have done more. Years ago. But I was just trying to survive in the department. You speak out too loud, you get buried. Ellison nodded. I've been there too. Different robe, same silence. Would you consider coming to speak to the academy? Reyes asked. New recruits. They need to hear you. Ellison looked at the man, measured him. Saw no angle, no PR stunt, just sincerity. I'll think about it, he said. The invitation came formally a week later. Ellison arrived at the police academy on a gray Tuesday morning. The room was filled with young faces, many white, many nervous. The kind of expressions that said, I'm here to learn, but I don't want to be the villain. He didn't open with the cafe story. He opened with something else. When I was 24, he said, I was pulled over for a busted taillight. Except my taillight wasn't busted. He told them how the officer made him get out of the car. How he had to lie on the pavement in the rain. How his law school books were tossed into a puddle. How he was called boy 3 times. How he was let go without apology. And the next day, Ellison said, I took my bar exam. Gasped. A few eyes lowered. Some of you will wear a badge in a few months, he continued. That badge does not make you a hero. It gives you a choice. Every single day. He scanned their faces. Will you be the person who escalates? Or the one who de-escalates? He told the cafe story at the end. Not for sympathy. Not for applause. But to show them the weight of casual assumptions. As the recruits filed out, one stayed behind. A young woman no older than 22. Asian American. Nervous. She approached him and said quietly, My father always told me to stay away from people like you. Ellison raised an eyebrow. People like me? She blushed. He grew up in the war. Had biases. And now I think he was wrong, she said. Thank you for today. By the time fall arrived, the cafe incident was no longer trending. The news had moved on. The country had found another outrage, another headline, another viral clip. But something else had begun to spread slowly, quietly. Other judges, retired and active, began sharing their stories. A federal judge in Ohio released a statement about being mistaken for the defendant in his own courtroom. A magistrate in Texas detailed how she had been asked to leave the court building because security assumed she was in the wrong place. Law reviews began publishing articles about implicit bias in the judicial system. Law students held panels titled, The Robe Doesn't Make You Invisible. And in the middle of it all, Ellison remained steady. Not chasing the spotlight, but not hiding from it either. One afternoon, he received a package. No name, no note. Inside was a small, carved wooden plaque. It read, Speak truth, even when your voice shakes. He placed it above his desk. Then, one quiet morning in November, he received a letter not typed, not printed, from Officer Kinley. It read, Judge Ellison, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I've spent every day since that moment thinking about what I did. I've started therapy, voluntarily. I'm attending workshops on racial bias. I joined a mentorship program in my old neighborhood. I speak at high schools now about what not to do. You didn't destroy my career. You gave me a chance to rebuild it with purpose. Thank you. I hope one day, if we meet again, I'm someone you'd be proud to know. Mark Kinley. Ellison read it twice, then a third time. Then he folded it and placed it in the top drawer of his desk next to the badge he once carried in court. Not everything ended in confrontation. Some things ended in growth. Winter came slowly, like an old friend reluctant to intrude. The city was quieter now, not because the world had changed, but because the storm had passed. For the moment, Ellison spent more time at home, the heater humming gently in the background as he read through letters from law students, officers, teachers, people he would never meet but who'd been moved to write. Some shared stories of their own. Some just wrote thank you. One envelope caught his eye. It was from Darnell, the young man in the cafe that day. The letter was short, handwritten, unpolished. Judge Ellison, I've been thinking a lot about that day, about what could have happened if you hadn't kept calm. I've started volunteering with an outreach program. Kids like me trying to stay in school, stay out of the mess. I still don't trust cops, but I trust that some people are trying to make it better. You didn't owe me anything, but you gave me something anyway. Respect. I won't waste it. Darnell. Ellison folded the letter with care. Then he picked up a pen and replied. That spring, Ellison stood at the back of a small community church in Southeast D.C., watching Natalie speak at a youth leadership forum. Her voice was confident, charged with a fire that reminded him of courtroom arguments. But this wasn't a defense. It was a rally cry. There are two systems in this country, she said. One that teaches some kids to reach for stars and one that teaches others to survive the night. I say we build a third. The audience clapped. Some stood. Some cried. Ellison didn't move. He just smiled. A week later, he got a call from the mayor's office. An offer. They wanted him to lead a new commission on racial equity in law enforcement. Not ceremonial. Not symbolic. Real authority. Real power. He thought long about it. Not because he doubted the mission but because he knew what it would cost him. Peace. Privacy. Quiet. Still, he said yes. Not for himself. For the kid in the cafe. For the recruit at the academy. For the young cop trying to unlearn what he'd been taught. The work was slow. Frustrating. Meetings stretched for hours. Resistance came dressed in suits and smiles, polite, strategic, deadly. But Ellison was patient. He knew the system's rhythms. He knew where it cracked. He began implementing community review boards with binding power, not just advisory ones. He proposed changes in police training simulations based not on threat escalation, but de-escalation. He pushed for an early warning system to flag officers who showed repeated patterns of bias or aggression. Some called it radical. He called it overdue. At one tense council hearing, a veteran officer stood and said, "With all due respect, Judge, you're punishing the many for the mistakes of the few." Ellison looked up from his notes. "With all due respect, officer," he replied, "you're asking me to accept a system where the few hold unchecked power and the many pay for it in silence." The room fell quiet. And then, applause. 1 year after the incident at the cafe, Ellison returned. Same street, same entrance, same table in the far left corner. Only this time, people didn't stare at him with suspicion. They nodded, smiled. One woman bought his coffee. A young man held the door open. A mother whispered to her child, "That's him. That's the judge I told you about." He didn't stay long. He didn't need to. The place had changed, or maybe the people had. That night, at home, he stood in front of his mirror. He was older, grayer, slower in the mornings, perhaps, but his eyes still held something steady. Conviction. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out the badge he used to carry honorary from his federal days. He placed it in a small wooden box alongside the letter from Kinley, the plaque, and Darnell's note. He didn't need the badge anymore. He had something better now. Voice. 2 weeks later, he gave a commencement speech at Howard University's School of Law. The auditorium was full, buzzing with the energy of ambition. When he stepped up to the podium, he didn't hold papers. He didn't need them. He looked out at the sea of young black and brown faces, eyes full of questions and hope, and he said, "Let me tell you a secret they won't print in your textbooks. You will be mistaken for less than you are. You will be questioned harder, watched longer, doubted louder, and yet, you must still rise. Because when you do, you change not just what they see. You change what they believe is possible." The crowd erupted. Ellison let the applause wash over him, not as ego but as affirmation. This was what legacy looked like. Not marble, not metals, but momentum. The final chapter came quietly. Ellison, now in his late 70s, sat in his garden one morning, coffee in hand, when a car pulled up. A woman stepped out, tall, braided hair, firm posture. She wore a police uniform. Not DC police. Atlanta. She approached the gate and smiled. "Judge Ellison?" "Yes," he said, shading his eyes. "I'm Officer Teresa Monroe. You probably don't remember me. I was one of the recruits you spoke to, about 4 years ago. The academy?" He smiled gently. "You made it." "I did. And I made detective last month." He gestured for her to come sit. They talked for 20 minutes. About the force. About change. About battles worth fighting. Before she left, she said, "Every time I'm in a situation, I remember your voice. Act second." That line saved lives. He nodded, deeply moved. "You're the kind of officer this world needs," he said. And for a moment, the cycle felt less broken. 1 week later, Ellison passed quietly in his sleep. No pain, no fanfare, just peace. His obituary was modest, per his request, but tributes came from everywhere. Natalie organized a memorial lecture series in his name. Darnell started a scholarship fund. Officer Kinley attended the funeral, sat in the back, cried silently. Teresa Monroe gave a eulogy. She ended with the words, "He taught us that justice wasn't a robe, a title, or a badge. Justice was a choice made daily, with courage, even when it's inconvenient." And somewhere in that same cafe, a new young black man ordered coffee. The barista smiled. The officer sitting nearby looked up, nodded with respect, and went back to reading. No incident, no misunderstanding, just a moment, changed, the end.